Wildlife Action Week continues, and you'll meet a public servant with lifetime ties to wildlife action. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Wildlife Action Adventure Camp on the Little Petey River. We're focused on public service, and we're visiting with Representative James A. Battle, Jr. of Marion County. Good morning.
Thank you, sir.
Jim, thanks so much. Can we call you Jim?
Jim, please.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It is so exciting to be in your home county.
Well, thank you. It's nice to have you down here. We're real proud of Marion County, and thank you for coming.
You've got to be, Jim. It was so exciting. Bunny was with us on Monday talking about founding Wildlife Action, of course talking about its 14,000 members.
Isn't that amazing?
Around the country. And of course he said it was he and 6 other guys, 1977 on the banks of the Great Petey River,
right,
talking about founding Wildlife Action. I think he mentioned that you're a life member.
I am.
And actually, we'll be back with Bunny tomorrow, pumping up a little bit. There are a couple weeks left in the camp for the summer,
right,
that still have some openings.
Okay.
So we're going to be out here with Bunny tomorrow as well.
Fantastic.
I tell you.
Well, talk it up. We need all the folks down here we can get.
Yeah, what was it like growing up in Marion County, Jim?
I can't imagine growing up any better than I grew up. I feel sorry for the kids that have not had the experience of growing up in the time and the place that I did. We spent time in the woods and outside, never inside, never watched. Of course, I'm going to tell you my age now, but when I was very young, we didn't have a lot of televisions around, but always outside, always playing ball in the woods, fishing, whatever. It was a great experience, and I wouldn't take anything for it.
Wouldn't trade it for the world,
No,
as folks say. Yeah.
And this experience here at Wildlife Action, this camp, sort of duplicates how I grew up. I mean, this is a lot of the things that they do here, because I live on this river also, not right on the river, but very close, in the town of Nichols. I'm probably 500, 600 yards away from the river.
Is that right?
Right. So the same experience as these kids get here is what I grew up in.
Golly, Jim. Now, were there instances of flooding when the river would flood that would cause some fear there around the home site?
Nichols flooded back in the 30s. The town of Nichols, but where I live personally has never flooded. I live on a high part of the town. In the 50s, I think it was, they constructed some canals that drain the swamps, and the water bypasses Nichols and runs into the river. Since that time, we've had water to back up in our drainage and so forth, but never flooding. Now the river down here floods,
right,
but not the town of Nichols.
Now Nichols, Highway 9 runs through Nichols.
That's
Okay,
correct.
Sure. And 76, I guess, splits through on the
comes through also.
As well.
9 and 76 come together in the town of Nichols.
That's fabulous. And of course, your representative position is over virtually the entire county of Marion.
Almost the whole county. There is a section closest to Florence that my good friend Representative Mac Hines represents and covers.
And Jackie Hayes, does he
Jackie Hayes,
at all?
no, he does not. Jackie's another good friend, but he comes right up to the Dillon County line, but does not come into Marion County, and I don't get out of Marion County, which is unusual. A lot of the legislators cover a couple of counties, but I do not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Share with viewers a little bit. Of course, the bulk of our viewers are in the PD and on the Strand, but a quarter of our viewers are in southeastern North Carolina, so they may not be familiar with the intricacies of how the House of Representatives is set up. But the House of Representatives in South Carolina, could you share with the viewers a little bit about?
Sure. At one time, we had one senator and representatives in every county, and it was decided, and rightfully so, that a representative who represents the people, and that's why we run every 2 years rather than every 4 years, because we are the people's representative. And if they don't like us, they don't have to put up with us more than 2 years. They can get us out. But what we do is every 10 years, as a census is taken, there are 126 124 House members in the House, and so we take the population of the state at that 10-year census and divide by 124, and we know that every representative then is going to be representing roughly 32,400 people. And so then, and you can do that, I think the Justice Department allows plus or minus 3%, but when these lines were being redrawn, we tried to stick to plus or minus 1%, and pretty much did that. So I, like every other representative, represents 32,000, roughly 400 people.
Is that right? Jim, how are the legislative districts drawn?
The General Assembly draws their own districts. The House of Representatives draws the House districts, and the senators draw the Senate districts. Sometimes this gets challenged in court, and when it does, then the Justice Department, through 3 judges, will redraw the lines if there is not an agreement on how they were drawn to begin with. But basically, we do our own lines unless somebody objects.
And then who draws the congressional districts? The same? Now, would that be both the House and the Senate?
And the Senate districts don't get redrawn because every state has 2 senators, regardless of the size, regardless of how many people that are in it. The South Carolina General Assembly draws the congressional districts, and we have 6 congressional districts, and so we draw those lines ourselves. The whole General Assembly does that.
Okay. So both houses are involved in that. Okay.
Yes.
But for the approval, I mean, this is of interest, for the approval of the House, the 124 districts, or the 46 state Senate districts, those are only approved by those bodies.
Approved by the bodies unless somebody, and anybody can do this, contest and say it's not fair, it's not the way it was drawn is not fair. There are several rules that you have to go by, and I won't go into all of them, but the district needs to be of like means, if you will. And there's a word for it, and I just can't think of it right now. But you wouldn't want to have a district that is, say, half rural and half metropolitan, or one that is divided by a lake. One side of the district's here, and then a lake on the other side. The people need to have the same needs, the things that is needed for one group of people should be for all. And so when you meet that criteria, then everything is fine. There's also the Justice Department comes in to make sure that there's not any racial gerrymandering, that it's fair to everybody that lives in the area.
Right. That's very interesting. Of course, there was a series of cases in North Carolina, the Shaw series of cases, Shaw v. Reno and Shaw v. Hunt, which had a dramatic impact on the drawing of districts, congressional districts, and obviously passed down to others. That's very interesting. Of course, I saw that your family has been involved in a business here in Marion County since it goes back to, I think, 1914, Jim.
Yes, the family has been here for a long time. The Battle part of my family, my father's family, came over in the 1840s and were involved in turpentine and a number of other things. And my grandfather went into business in 1914. He bought into an existing business, which was Henson and Ward, and he bought the Ward out, and it became Henson and Battle. And then shortly after that, he bought the Henson family out, and it became J.R. Battling Company. But yes, we have been involved since 1914.
Well, I saw that. Of course, I think it was Battle Gas, or Battle LP Gas.
Battle LP Gas Company and J.R. Battling Company are the ones that I'm involved in, and I have an uncle that is involved in Battle Oil Company.
Well, in visiting the State House site, I think it said you're both a merchant and a farmer, Jim Battle, and of course the involvement in the farming, I guess, would stretch back a long way as well.
Yes, we, up until the early 1900s, really considered our business to be farm-oriented. Our slogan was complete farm service. We manufactured fertilizer. We had outlets in North and South Carolina. We did a lot of things. And early on, we had a grocery store and a general merchandise store, a number of things. And all of it was to serve farmers. And the early 1900s, we decided that we probably needed to diversify some. And so we did that through our propane company and started trying to develop a residential business down at the beach and Florence and other areas. But yes, we're still very heavily involved in farming, primarily tobacco farming.
Okay. When a viewer hears, or when anyone hears tobacco farming, of course that was the cash crop for Horry County and the PD for many years. I assume
still
is. Yeah.
Still is.
Still is.
Yeah.
Can you share with viewers, and I think it would be of interest to a lot of folks, just exactly how that tobacco process works, really from beginning to end? We've got a little time. If you'd be willing to.
Sure, I'll be very brief because it is very involved. There's a lot more to tobacco farming than anybody could ever guess, and these guys that are out there farming tobacco, nobody understands what they really go through. There's a tremendous amount of risk. There are so many things that they have no control over. The weather, the government, and a number of other people that are involved in it. But the crop starts it used to be in tobacco beds where you seeded a bed and covered it with a canvas and grew a plant in this bed. Everybody now has gone to greenhouses. So the tobacco farming starts in a greenhouse and you grow small plants. These plants are then transplanted from the greenhouse through a planter into the fields. And tobacco is management intensive. It's easy to grow tobacco, just any kind of tobacco, because tobacco is considered to be a weed. But to grow quality tobacco that is marketable takes a lot of effort, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of work. But once it's in the field, then of course you depend on the rains and the weather. A lot of people are turning to irrigation now, but with the way tobacco has gone in our quota system, the quota has been going down recently as we have successfully talked folks out of smoking because there are possibly some health hazards there. But as tobacco begins to level off where I think it is, we're going to see a lot more irrigation coming into the fields. When the tobacco matures, which it'll do in a few weeks from now, generally around the 1st of July, and in that area, people will start harvesting tobacco and they're put into barns. And we raise flue-cured tobacco, so the tobacco is cured in barns with heat and air. And the burley market, which is grown in the mountains and some of the other areas, is just air dried. But here we use to beat heat. They use propane, which is one of the reasons we got into the propane business, was to cure this tobacco, and big fans to do it. And it takes about a week or a little longer to cure the tobacco. They take it out, put it in sheets. It used to be that you had to tie it and do a number of things with it, but so much is automated now. They take it out and take it to the warehouses. And up until recently, all tobacco was auctioned. And you had an auctioneer that would go up and down the floors and bid on the tobacco. Most people still think in South Carolina that tobacco is subsidized. Tobacco is not subsidized. There is a floor, but the floor is provided by the farmers themselves. We assess ourselves so much on every pound of tobacco that is sold, and that goes into a pool, and that is used to buy tobacco that the companies did not want at this time. And so that it appears to be subsidized, but it's not really. But the farmers do this themselves, and the tobacco that goes into the co-op is owned by the farmers. The auction system has now gone by the wayside. I say not. There are a few auction houses around. Most of them run by the co-op. Now the major companies have come in and created buying stations, and it's a lot more efficient than the old way of buying tobacco. Farmers bring it in. They have a contract. They know what they're going to get for their various grades of tobacco. It's unloaded with forklifts. It's put on a conveyor belt. It comes across an automated scale. A buyer is sitting right there, puts a grade on it. When the grade goes on, the computer knows what price it is. It goes off of the end of the conveyor belt. It's moved up to another part in the buying station, which is a warehouse converted. And that same day, for the most part, it is shipped out of there and goes to a processing plant, which will re-dry it and make tobacco, put it in hogsheads that can later be made into cigarettes. And from the processing plants, it goes to the cigarette manufacturers or goes overseas to other countries where the cigarettes are being
That
manufactured.
is fascinating, Jim. Thanks for taking some time
Well,
to
I
do
said
that.
I was going to be brief. I might have gotten a little wind.
No, but I'm sure. I mean,
Yeah.
you obviously even had to cut out some things.
Right.
There could be much.
Yeah.
There's obviously
Yeah.
much more than that. That's incredible. And of course, at the facilities, we think in the Carolinas, we think of Winston-Salem being a big powerhouse of
And it
RJR's
is.
presence.
And Richmond.
Of course, Richmond, Virginia,
Right.
with its with Marlboro and some other
Right.
major cigarettes processed up there. But you used a word when I think you said tobacco quota, and folks have heard that phrase for a long time.
The only thing that the federal government is involved in with tobacco, and I'm making it very simple here, there are still laws on the books that determine how much tobacco a farmer can grow. Now, they don't subsidize this anymore. The farmers do that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But this quota system goes up and down based on how much the cigarette companies need, how much is in inventory that the co-op bought, for instance, and what the export, and I'm just giving you the bit.
Right,
There's
right.
more to it than this. And then the Secretary of Agriculture in Washington has the authority to go up or down on that like 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And then they establish a total amount of flue-cured tobacco and burley tobacco, but that can be grown. And then that is divided up based on the percentage of the market that you had earlier. And that is bought and sold and there. One of the problems with American tobacco, in my opinion, and this is an opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and apparently a lot of people feel this way now, is the quota system. It was an absolutely wonderful system for a very long time. But now, since people have quotas, in order for a farmer to farm that, if he doesn't own the quota, he has to rent it. And the rent runs from anywhere from 30 to 60 or 70 cents, depending on the area and supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an artificial cost to the tobacco company because they have to pay enough to cover this rent plus the tobacco itself, which means that our tobacco is sometimes overpriced based on the world market. There is a movement in Washington now to buy out this quota. And if it were bought out, then, and it's the folks that, I think about, and this is an extreme example, but there are a lot of widows whose husbands were farmers, and they were tobacco farmers, and they bought quota because they didn't know anything about the stock market or motels at the beach and those things, so they bought quota knowing that if something ever happened to them, the widow could take those pounds, that quota, and rent it to another farmer, and that could be her retirement. Mm-hmm. If we just took that away, well, this quota system would have created a very unfair situation for the people that had depended on it. Mm-hmm. So now there's a movement to buy it out over a 5-year period of time and pay the people for the quota, and then anybody that wants to farm tobacco and has the land can do it, no quota, and supply and demand will again determine how much that is.
And who would actually be purchasing the quota? It would be the co-op?
Well, the co-op could do it, but my guess is the manufacturers of cigarettes will issue contracts to those folks that can that are the better farmers, the ones that are able to do it and want to do it. And I think when the quota system's gone, hardly anybody is going to grow tobacco that they don't have a contract for to sell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the tobacco companies are going to know that this is a risky crop. It not only is management intensive, it's capital intensive as well. And they are going to pay these farmers enough to not only cover the expense of the crop, but enough profit in there to encourage them to stay in business, rather than going into the hardware business or going into the restaurant business or something, because it is hard. It's 24 hours a day, 52 weeks out of the year, and it's a tough life, and you got to love it to do it. But if you can't make a living for your family, people are going to leave that business. And as I heard my brother, who really runs our tobacco part of this, say yesterday, is tobacco manufacturers need tobacco being grown all over the world just in case there's a disaster in one part of the world that they can continue to make cigarettes. If it was all grown in the southeast part of of the United States and we had a drought and there was not a tobacco crop, then there would be no cigarettes, especially if it had lasted a couple of years.
Right. So there are other parts of the world that are particularly conducive to growing tobacco.
Yes, Brazil does a fine job, and they grow a lot of tobacco, and there are places in Africa that grow a decent quality of tobacco. Almost every country grows some tobacco, and of course the largest producers of tobacco in the world is China.
Is that right?
But they're also the largest consumers, and they very seldom, I don't think, let me just stick with very seldom, export any of that tobacco. They're able to consume that right in their country.
Is that right? I wasn't aware of that. I would have thought that, for instance, Philip Morris and RJR were able to maintain strength and continue to do well because of sales to other countries.
Well, they do. They are, and they do depend on that. And of course, when you're talking about American cigarettes, you're talking about the Cadillacs of the cigarette business. Right. You're talking about the highest quality cigarette in the world. And so it's important to us, for them, for their standard of living to rise to the point that they can afford American cigarettes, because when they can afford it, they're going to buy them.
Absolutely.
The Marlboro brand is everywhere, as is the Winston and the Camel and all the others.
Jim, we got about 5 minutes, and of course I wanted to focus on public service. And just being out here at Wildlife Action, you feel like you're taking a piece of that, because it was so exciting hearing Bunny talk about that on Monday,
right.
A 501c3 out here and getting the kids out here. But obviously much of what you do and have done and successfully were voted back in last Tuesday, congratulations.
Thank you.
Is representing many of the folks of Marion County. What originally prompted you to run for office?
I've never run for any elected office in my life, and really it was not even in the back of my mind. When the person who was the incumbent before I ran decided not to run anymore, it left a void. And one of my family members, my brother Bob, came in and said, "Jim, why don't you consider doing this?" And I was thinking, I don't have time to do this. And just said, "Well, if you guys will cover for me while I'm gone, and don't fire me, I'll give it a try." And he said, "Well, we'll do this if you promise to win." And so I went out and found out it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. If you're conscientious and you try to help the citizens that you represent, because, and I'm sure it's the same in all districts, but there's so many needs out there, personal needs, in addition to doing the right thing in Columbia and voting correctly. There's so many people with so many needs. It's just constant trying to get those things done. But basically, I felt like Marion County had a lot of opportunity. We were very close to the beach, very close to Florence. We're going to have an interstate coming through here soon. Hopefully we'll have a regional airport in the bottom part of Marion County, and I wanted to be a part of all that. I thought with my business experience, my background of years in the business world, that I would be able to bring some of that to bear in Marion County and help develop it and improve not only the standard of living, but the quality of life for the people in Marion County.
It was obviously going to have an impact on your business. Fortunately, you had just one brother or two brothers?
I have two brothers. One brother is in business with me. I have an attorney brother, and then I have a cousin that is in business with us here in Nichols.
So fortunately they could help
absolutely
cover a little bit. But you've also got a bride here in the county that
I do.
had to open that door for you to be able to...
Well, I'm going to tell you, she has been so supportive, and I could not do that without her encouragement and her help. She has just been the Rock of Gibraltar. It's kept everything going at home, and without her help and encouragement, it would have not been possible.
It was so exciting talking to you earlier in the week about one of the thrills for you on Wednesdays, being able to catch up with your daughter there who works in Columbia. And
I have a daughter that's an attorney. She is the editor for Lawyers Weekly, and her deadline is at noon on Wednesday. So on Wednesday evenings, we normally are able to go out and have dinner together and spend a little time together, which is very nice. There's no pressure anywhere. We're just able to visit with one another, and that's been wonderful. My wife is Catherine, and my daughter is Bess. I failed to mention their names, but I wanted to get that in.
Very definitely. And I enjoyed so much seeing you and your wife, particularly your wife at the Galvin's Ferry Stump. She came over having enjoyed Billie Holiday's, interview
Right.
leading up to the stump. We did a week, a guest
Right.
each week for about 6 weeks leading up to the stump.
And she thought she might be a voter, so she didn't want to
That's
pass
right.
up on
the
anything.
wrong county. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, good thinking. What about for you, Jim, when you think about growing up here in Marion County, having left for a little while? I know we didn't talk about that.
Sure.
Fortunately, you and I had. You were in the armed services.
Correct.
As well as up in Charlotte for a little while, but decided there was no way that you were...
Well, I at one time had thought that I wasn't sure whether I ever wanted to move back to a small town or not. But when it got time to raise children, I decided that I did not want to do that in the big city environment. I wanted to come back, and I talked about my childhood. I talked about wildlife action, and I wanted children to be raised in the same environment that I was, and she was, and she did many of the same things we did when we were growing up.
If you weren't currently a representative, now going into your fifth, soon to be in your fifth term, Jim,
Right.
What do you think you'd be doing?
That's a good question. I'm a firstborn type A personality, and I always wonder whether I would be able to slow down. I really have, I can just say this, ignorance is bliss. Before I got involved in politics, I really didn't know what it was like out there. Spent all my time running my business. Now that I know that I would be performing some sort of community service. But I'm also getting older. I'd like to do a little more fishing, a little more golf, and some of those things, and help my family run the business.
That's great.
Yeah.
Jim, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with the Honorable Jim Battle coming up next. Growing up in the 40s and 50s here in Marion County, close to the Pee Dee River, that excitement of recognizing at some point he'd have to go away, but he always knew at some point he'd have to return home. In 1972, he got back here. He's been here since. Nichols, Mullins, the entire area of Marion County stretches out, and he stretches up to Columbia now, going into his fifth term. Jim Battle, thanks so much for being with us this morning.